He was like on a boat, like on a yacht. Like I remember these pictures I saw of him and I was like, oh my God. Like,
Oh, well, like I said, Elizabeth, it's always great to speak with you. And we're so excited to have you on to talk all about this new CNN six-part series, Diana. We watched the first episode and it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, how does this series show Diana in a new light?
I think for certainly my generation of royal watchers, this is a chance to really learn about Diana, right? I grew up, I'm not young, but I'm just young enough that I didn't grow up watching her in real time. And to learn about her as I was researching my book, HRH, was sort of really eye-opening. I've watched Kate and Meghan for a long time, and understanding Diana, is sort of like a foundation to royal fashion, certainly. And what I think that this docuseries does so well is like lay out her very complicated life and legacy. She was so young when she married into the royal family and so young when she died, and so much happened that I love that there's this 6-part series that, sort of covers all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. So for people who might not know, what was her upbringing like? She ran in royal circles, right?
Yeah, so Diana was definitely like royal adjacent is what I sort of consider it. She was very familiar with the royal family, and her family was sort of intertwined. And I think, from a very young age that she knew certainly what the royal family meant and what, being a part of it would mean, and sort of set her eye on it a little bit. I think you look back at her childhood and it wasn't a happy one. She came from sort of a broken home and had a lot of conflict in her family. And, to think that she met Charles when she was still very much just a teenage girl, growing up in the country, and, how quickly her life changed. It truly is sort of that fairy tale.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that, she didn't grow up in a happy home. And I think that probably maybe for most people who aren't, Diana enthusiasts and don't know too much about her upbringing, I think you're probably surprised knowing that like her mom left and, didn't get custody of her children.
Yeah. I mean, her parents had a pretty ugly divorce, and her mom did not get custody. And I think that certainly shaped a lot of her life. She came from a broken home, and she entered into the royal family, which was obviously a much different and very complicated family. And she didn't have that sort of like stable foundation to come from. And I think that was really unfortunate and sort of, but it also helped her sort of understand the pain of other people. I think her upbringing, she used that in her royal tenure to great effect. And, the sort of the humanity that she brought to it was unparalleled.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And weren't her parents sort of disappointed that she wasn't a boy?
Yeah, can you imagine? I mean, I just think about that and I'm like, God, that hurts my heart. But she had, the idea of like inheriting things in royal circles, and the need for a son to pass along the estate to and the titles. The fact that Diana was not a boy after, her mother had and her father had wanted one so badly and had given birth, and that son died. And, it's all so tragic. But yes, she was up against a lot, to come into the world knowing that your parents had wanted a boy. Like what a difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, did she have a relationship with her mother after she left?
I mean, I think she did to a certain extent. And certainly when she joined the royal family, her mother, helped her with some of her shopping. Royal fashion is sort of my wheelhouse. And
Totally.
I know that her mom tried to help, certainly in those early days. As she was, when she became engaged to Charles, she talks about how she had so few clothing options, and her mom, they tried to go shopping and sort of beef up her wardrobe from the start. So I think she did, but certainly not, she didn't come from a stable home. She didn't come from a place where she had that security. And I think she was very much looking for that in her new groom.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that Diana and Kate and Meghan have in common is obviously that they all married into the royal family. And whenever that happens, there are these rumors about how premeditated it is. So can you tell us, did Diana really have a poster of Prince Charles in her bedroom?
Yeah. I think the one little factoid that I think about a lot with Diana is that she had the nickname Dutch. as a kid, and that was short for Duchess. And I think that she did have royal aspirations. And you have to remember too, like if you rewind to like the late 70s, 80s when Diana hit the scene, Prince Charles was like the world's most eligible bachelor. You know, I mean, he was the heir to the throne, and he was sort of this like stud, and like everybody, I think, wanted to marry Charles. And certainly Diana had that royal proximity, right? Like her family was part of, you know, was just next to the royal family. And so, yeah, I would imagine that it was not, it was a fantasy of hers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Charles does look good in that archival footage. Sometimes it's like, oh,
he was like on a boat, like on a yacht. Like I remember these pictures I saw of him and I was like, oh my God, like it's not the Charles obviously we know today. I mean, he was a heartthrob, and everybody was sort of wondering like, who are you going to pick? And he was older, right? He was in his 30s, and it was like time. And so that's a big part of this story too. Like everyone was like, tick, tick, you got to make an heir.
Yeah. Well, that kind of like, you know, it's interesting when, you know, you learn about their courtship too, and why and like how they got engaged. And they only spent like 13 times together before he popped the question, and none of those times were alone. Yeah, like, how do you make that type of decision at that time?
It was so brief. And I think that sort of speaks to how he was approaching this and the pressures that he was feeling. It was like, you got to find somebody that checks all these boxes. Mm-hmm. And then it was sort of like a formality almost, because we know now clearly he was romantically interested in Camilla and had the pressure certainly of the throne. And here he was, and he was like, okay, this, you know, here's a young woman who has no history, and checks all these boxes. And she was just, you know, like all hard eyes, you know, and like about the whole thing, and so young. I mean, 19, right? Like she's making this huge life decision without, you know, a stable family behind her, much guidance really. And then, so now, I mean, looking back in hindsight, it's very easy to find all the red flags, right? And be like, oh my God, like, what were you all thinking? Mm-hmm. But I think then, you know, it was like, we're marching forth, you know, we're doing our duty. He was doing his duty. He was finding a bride who would produce an heir. And she was, you know, a teenager swept up in it all. And like, it's just really understandable to me how all this went wrong, but also how it happened in the first place.
Is it true that Prince Charles may have proposed because of sort of a miscommunication with his father?
You know, I don't want to speak to that specifically, but I do think that he was clearly pressured to propose.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, you kind of get that sense though, because, you know, their courtship was so quick, and like you said, she checks all the boxes. So it seems like probably the pressure was definitely on him.
Yeah. You know, I think it was that, like, Charles was seen as very much as sort of like almost like a business transaction, you know, like you had to keep the firm going here. And Diana, again, she just checked so many boxes and sort of slotted right in, and was clearly very eager and willing and wanting to please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
mean, who wouldn't want it? Like, that's the other thing. I think about like Diana in that position, and if like a prince is proposing, you know, I mean, like that's the stuff like teenage girl dreams are made of.
Yeah, absolutely. So during their engagement interview, when Charles said whatever in love means, what do you think might have been going through Diana's mind?
I mean, gosh, can you imagine, right? I think about that and the way that he said it, and her, you know, when we have the video, right, you can see in her eyes, it's like what? And we know now, you know, in hindsight that was, you know, that's a really hard thing to hear. I can't imagine what it's like. But I also think about how much was probably new to Diana at this moment, and how much she was trying to go with it, and how much she wanted it too. You know, I mean, I do think that she entered into all of this in good faith, you know, in wanting, you know, wanting the romance of it all.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, she was so young, she probably didn't, and she didn't really come from a very loving household. She probably didn't know what love was either. So she's probably like, this is normal, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, to come from a broken home and not have a model of a marriage that, you know, worked well, and to not totally understand, you know, the inner workings of the royal family, or to even know Charles, you know, and they had spent time alone together. So here she is learning about him on the public stage. Like, how difficult would that be?
She said that she felt like a lamb to slaughter, and she couldn't do anything about it. We talked about maybe Charles feeling the pressure to marry Diana, but maybe Diana felt the pressure to marry Charles as well once she kind of got into this and maybe felt a little in over her head.
Yeah, I think about we obviously have those words from her, right? Like she recorded those tapes and we have a sense of how she looked back on it and how scary it must have been. But I do think that like once she said yes, she was sort of on a runaway train almost, like it was out of her control. She had to she was swept up in all of it and didn't have much of a voice or a say. And how difficult that would be. Like, how would she know what to do? How would she know when to speak up for herself? And could she even, there's so many questions about that. It makes my heart hurt.
Seriously.
Yeah. Do you think they really ever did love each other?
I don't know if it's the romantic in me, but I want to believe that they did. I think she certainly did. And I think she wanted very much for it to work out. And I think that Charles, I think he saw in her at times the potential and the promise and, under different circumstances might have felt differently. But I think Diana definitely, I think she did.